CNN here with an excellent story about taxes. Now, I've been telling you all along that the corporations have taken over the body politic, and they've done that by having Supreme Court do decisions like Citizens United. Now, I say having the Supreme Court do that because back in 1971, Lewis Powell wrote a memo on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce saying, hey, we should take over a lot of the institutions in this country, including the Supreme Court. And then Nixon thought that was such a good idea. He took that young man who wrote that memo and put him on the Supreme Court and said, go ahead and take it over. And then Lewis Powell was critical in decisions like Buckley v. Vallejo and Bellotti, which said, yeah, money is speech. And corporations are human beings, so they can speak with their money. And ever since, we've lost our democracy. Citizens United basically shot a dead horse. According to a Princeton study, they studied 1,800 policy positions over 20 years. Public policy is not at all affected by public opinion. That means you don't live in a democracy. Donor opinion has complete effect, a direct correlation to public policy. Okay, so that means they're in charge. So now, when you look into the taxes in this country, you begin to see how that manifests itself and how you've been robbed. Okay, so that's where we go to the CNN story. First of all, our tax is too high. You know, Republicans are always saying, oh, tax is too high. Oh my God, you twisted my arm. Oh God damn it, they're so high. No, that's actually not true. In 2015, federal taxes are on track to be about 18% of the economy. That's normal. That is historically very, very average. Okay, it is not too high. The question is, who's paying the taxes? And that leads us to this incredibly interesting chart. So let's take a look at the two pie charts. One is in 1952 and the other is 2015. In 1952, you see that individuals pay about 42% of all the taxes. Now, in 2015, they pay 46.5% of taxes. So they pay a higher proportion. Well, that's interesting. But here's what's more interesting. Back then, in 1952, remember the good old days, according to conservatives in this country, corporations paid 32.1% of all taxes. Today, they only pay 10.8%. A massive redistribution of the tax burden and hence a redistribution of wealth. Corporations pay a lot less than they used to. Now, who did they shift that burden on to? Well, obviously, as you just saw, some to individuals. Now, the problem there is that some of those individuals are very rich, so they don't want to shift too much into that category. So what's the category that went up the highest? Social insurance and retirement. That used to be only 9.7% of the pie, only 10% of the taxes that were paid overall in 1952. Today, it's at 33.5%. So that is where they got redistributed to. So, why? Well, you see, Social Security taxes are paid only by people making a certain amount and less. There's a cap on it. Once you get past the cap, and that's a little over $100,000, right? Well, then you don't have to pay the Social Security tax anymore. That's actually, in some ways, the most regressive tax we have, where the rich get to skate on anything extra. If you were rich and your plan was to shift the taxes onto the poor and the middle class, that is the tax that you would increase. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And what would you decrease? Well, corporate taxes, which is obviously going to the very rich who are the executives and shareholders of those corporations. So let me go back to CNN here. They explain businesses became smarter, well, that's one way of putting it, about finding ways to legally lower their tax bills over the years. Companies that operate globally moved their tax jurisdictions overseas to reduce how much they paid in U.S. taxes. Others have filed for S-corporation status, which allows them to pass income through to shareholders who pay taxes at a lower rate. See, this isn't just about being smart. It's not like this was in the tax code already, and they're like, oh, wait, I got an idea. Why don't we take the taxes through here, through our offshore subsidiary, and then that way we'll save taxes. No. They changed the rules. They bought the politicians. The first rule they changed was, let us buy the politicians. We'll call that money we're giving them, not a bribe as it used to be. It's my new speech. I'm just talking to them. I talk to them through millions of dollars that I gave them. And then I'll have them change the rules so they will reduce, for example, to two different ways. They'll reduce the amount of money that the IRS gets so they can't come and regulate me, so they can't, if I'm cheating on my taxes or I'm using one too many loopholes or I'm being a little generous in how I interpret that loophole, well, they don't have the resources to track me down. The other way is just flat out change the rules, right? So that, for example, oil companies get $40 billion a year in subsidies. The politicians say that the most profitable companies in the world, in the history of the world, should get subsidies from the rest of us. Insane. Now, in a democracy, you would never have that, but we don't have a democracy. The corporations took over our government, and what did? They reduced their tax burden, and they shifted it onto you. Well, that was pretty convenient, wasn't it? So now let's look at the second half of that equation. About the Social Security tax. When it commenced, back in 1937, by the way, the Social Security tax was just a mere 2%. Now it's 12.4% for Social Security and 2.9% for Medicare. Now look, if that was fair and it applied to all taxes and that 12.4% went beyond $200,000 and it went to millionaires and billionaires and it was 12.4% of all their income, well then you might say, hey look, it makes sure that people have something to retire on. Obviously we're in favor of Social Security and Medicare and making sure those are funded. But it doesn't. That's the one tax that says leave the rich alone. And shockingly, it turns out that's the tax percentage that tripled. You see what they did? They robbed you in broad daylight. The people in Washington say, oh, money in politics, campaign finance reform, that's just one issue. That's just a remote issue that's hard for people to understand. Is this easy to understand? You've been robbed. You've been had. You've been took. This is the great American robbery. They did it over the course of decades. And all those trillions of dollars in taxes, they stopped paying them and they made you pay them. Is that clear enough? If you don't get an amendment to get money out of politics and end the bribery, end the corruption, and bring back free and fair elections, but we don't have a democracy and they're going to keep on robbing you. They're doing it now. They're going to do it tomorrow unless you get up and fight back. Wolf-pack.com. You know what we're doing? We're bringing together a team of warriors who aren't going to stand for it. We're going to fight back. They're not coming for us anymore. You know what we're going to do? We're going to come for them. We're going to come for them politically, and we're going to get that amendment. Every generation of Americans has gotten an amendment except us. Well, it's time to change that. Get up and ride. You going to let them keep robbing you? I'm not. Wolf-pack.com. Volunteer, become a member, do whatever you have to do, but let's go get the sons of bitches. Young Turks.